When we think about sustainability and sustainable solutions, we often think about products and innovations that are created by sustainability champions. Venture capitalists, also known as VCs, are typically the ones who provide money to sustainability champions like the ones we featured on our podcast to help get their ideas off the ground. Without this financial support, the innovations the world needs would take much longer to become reality. In today's episode, I speak with Jon Dishotsky, investment partner at Giant Ventures, a VC that invests in purpose-driven companies that focus on making a positive impact on climate change and healthcare. Through their investments, they champion tech founders who are creating a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient planet. As former founders, the team at Giant Ventures knows how hard it is to create something from nothing, but they want to roll their sleeves up to help Giant founders win. Jon is also the host of his own podcast channel, Seed Stories, where he has brief conversations with founders who've recently raised a seed round. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hey, Jon, thanks so much for joining the Sustainability Champions podcast. Great to have you on the show.
Daniel, excited to be here.
Thanks very much. And the way I like to start these conversations is by going big picture and really getting a kind of the elevator pitch, if you will, for what is Giant VC.
Giant Ventures, simply put, backs purpose-driven founders with a huge majority of our investments focused on climate. We're led by a team of former founders and operators. And our goal is really to, Cameron and Tommy, who started the firm, did an incredible job to really focus on what are the big societal challenges, right? We don't need any more photo sharing apps. We don't need more productivity tools. We just solve these big problems. We believe climate change is real, but entrepreneurs can solve it. And we believe the problems within healthcare are also creating a massive problem in society as well. And so as we look at those challenges, it's not going to be the big companies, the big Fortune 500 companies of today that fix it. They're kind of like big cruise ships, cruise liners. It takes a long time for them to get out of port and move. We look at the speedboats, right? Like who are the fast moving entrepreneurs who can look at new technologies, services, and products that can tackle these major challenges.
That's amazing. And so what are some of these, and it's interesting, first of all, to hear that you took societal problems and you broke it down into environmental and healthcare as the two kind of industries or concepts that you're focusing on. But in terms of environmental, because obviously sustainability champions, we're focused on environmental questions. Maybe there's a podcast called Healthcare Champions, and they could talk about the other side. But with the environmental challenges, I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing right now that companies are really interested in solving? I mean, there's climate change, there's plastic, there's so many different, deforestation. Are you seeing any trends?
Yeah, I mean, look, the headline is that this is a new industrial revolution in our mind, right? Like we are decarbonizing the entire economy. And anybody who doesn't get excited by that is like, they're just maybe asleep or, a dinosaur, who knows? And if you look at every industry, whether it be mobility, whether it be transportation, whether it be materials, every single thing that you touch, feel, and use, and the way that you work is going to be decarbonized. And so we look at every single industry and we say, okay, what's the new innovative way to sort of build to bear, or bring a product to market that is a less, sort of lower footprint type of version of that, of what exists today. A couple examples that come to mind. Let's just take one of my favorites. Jose and Nico started a company, and Ali started a company called Water Plan. Water helps corporates and NGOs to predict and plan their water usage. Okay. So if you look at like InBev and Coca-Cola and Amazon and Gap, they are using a ton of water. Okay. But how do we really map out and predict using artificial intelligence the correct amount of water to be using? Right. So these are the types of examples of companies that we could really get really excited about. Copperfield, another great example of a company that's basically trying to one-click electric vehicle charger installation in every home. Meaning, right now you go and buy a Tesla, go and buy a Rivian. There's like this complicated process to figure out how to install your EV charger in your home. Copperfield wants to be the sort of backbone to make that process a lot simpler, enabling tens of millions, hundreds of millions of homes to have an EV car. So like if you look at all the different areas within this sort of current economy, there's massive opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And some of these solutions are really, they're quite simple in that, like with water, you're just trying to predict so you and understand, because it's a very high impact, high leverage issue. I mean, water scarcity is becoming a real problem globally, and a simple solution like being able to understand just how much a company needs, uses, and being able to optimize that has a really big impact. And same thing with the EV chargers. It's one of those things. I mean, if it costs tons of money and a lot of time to figure out how to just plug your car in, people aren't going to want to do it. It's just too much of a pain. And if you can solve those issues, then it's those kind of hurdles that if you can cross and pass through, it unlocks it unlocks the next step of the journey and the evolution.
You're totally right. I mean, I think the other thing that's cool is in our vantage point, we are literally like our email inbox every day is like a science fair. Like I remember as a kid growing up in Palo Alto, California, and lucky enough to like be in the sort of breeding ground of Silicon Valley. I forget if it was GM or Ford brought by, and this was in the late 90s. They brought by, I'm aging myself. They brought by this like car vision of the future. And it was actually like a battery powered car. And they were like, there'll be a computer on the dashboard. And, here we were in our auto shop rebuilding, Chevy Chevelles and like Malibus and stuff like that. And we are like, no way. Like, there's no way there's going to be an electric car with a computer. And like, obviously, kids in Silicon Valley were like, yeah, but maybe, who knows? Um, and we've sort of gotten to that point. You know what I mean? And it's really fun to see. And obviously, GM and Cruise now have battery powered driverless cars on the city of San Francisco, which is like revolutionary. And so I think that over a short period of time, humans can be quite pessimistic about progress. But if you sort of take a step back, it's really incredible to see the things that we can create. I mean, Peter Thiel famously said, we asked for flying cars and all we got was 140 characters. And he said that in jest, meaning that progress in Silicon Valley only got us Twitter. But in reality, if you look across the landscape of aviation, with Heart Aerospace, with Joby Innovation or Aviation, there's now electric propulsion in aircraft. We backed a company that's really excited about called Otis Aviation, which is bringing short haul flights into a hybrid electric airframe and aircraft, within the next decade. And what that means is a large majority of air travel, which is regional, will be nearly completely decarbonized. And so there's, like you start to rack your brain, like why the future won't look like the Jetsons. And it's hard to it's hard to think that it won't. And that's where you can tell I get pretty excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I never actually thought of a hybrid plane. That makes a lot of sense. If there's a way, especially if it's like a propeller, if like a really small plane, no reason to have to rely solely on fuel for that. I guess the biggest challenge, just thinking out loud, is the weight of a battery pack. But batteries are becoming smaller, and yeah, they're constantly improving.
Yeah. So again, I think that's where the regional airline is the right actual
Exactly.
size and perfect category to tackle,
Hmm.
because you can use biofuel, jet fuel, which is obviously significantly lower carbon footprint for certain high propulsion areas. And James is going to kill me for my lackluster description here, but shout out to James, who's, a genius. But in short, there's periods of time when it makes sense to be using biofuels and makes sense, and then obviously once you reach sort of flying altitude, you can rely on a battery for significant distance and a patented airfoil system, which is pretty incredible. So those are the areas. Like, again, you look at just sort of the entire economy, whether it comes to travel or housing or mobility, the areas that are investable. And Giant gets involved very early. Like, we oftentimes are investing when there is early version of the product. It's a little rough around the edges, a little bit of traction, but it's not perfect. It's a concept, it's a team and a dream. And we're incredibly selective in the types and caliber of companies that we try to back. Reason being that these are exceptionally difficult challenges that they're taking on, and it just requires a level of grit, tenacity, sort of intellectual curiosity, EQ, storytelling, that full package. That's very, very hard to come by. But when they do, incredible things are created, right? Obviously, the famous story being Tesla and Elon and what that's done. But even more, there's so many other examples that are really encouraging nowadays.
On the point of how you invest, and just going deeper into what you just said in terms of what you look for in a company, and I guess there's this term impact investing, and you mentioned purpose driven, and I think these are wonderful phrases that are being used quite a lot to talk about. It doesn't just sit within the environmental framework, as you were saying. You're also interested in healthcare, but when you speak to or look at your science fair inbox, and you're trying to find a good company to invest in that is providing actual impact, that is purpose driven, what are some things that you're specifically looking for, perhaps beyond kind of some of the things that you mentioned just now?
So obviously, environmental, social, and governance are three separate and distinct, very important things for companies to tackle, and also in some cases kind of convoluted that those three are sort of combined for a rating. I think they're all sort of distinctly important, and almost never are they mutually exclusive. But in any event, that is a framework that is what I would call the stick in this carrot stick analogy for sort of adherence to certain frameworks of political pressure in many ways. Impact is a framework that's been around for a long time, in many cases for investors to make what are called concessionary investments. And that means a project or company that wouldn't otherwise be funded because the returns are below market, were it not for this investor to come along and take sub-market returns. Okay. It's not to say that that's not important, but it's still understated how large the true impact of those can typically be. And then finally, what we call climate investing or climate tech investing. Now, this has gone through a bunch of fits and starts, but in recent years has grown to be about $100 billion in the last two markets combined. So obviously really incredible. Famously, a storied investor by the name of John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins really created the first wave of climate tech venture capital investing in the 2000s. And it had a rough patch, right? And actually almost sort of buried the reputation of that storied Silicon Valley franchise. But KP, under the tutelage of Mahmoud Hamid, ended up being fine. And the second wave is a lot more what I would call pragmatic, and it is broad reaching. It is, as I said, a new industrial revolution. It comes with traditional venture capital approach, meaning there is still an expectation that there will be an outsized return and a large outcome for this company. And it's not just going to be it's not going to remain as a science fair project for 4 years in a laboratory. Like there really needs to be commercial go-to-market, true milestones, and this, sort of early funding is not going to be large windfalls of capital to then go off in oblivion and produce projects. It's going to happen with seed funding, early stage funding from investors like us. It's going to have real market validation, customer validation, whether it be that consumers or businesses, and then follow-on investment from mainstream traditional venture capital investors, and then growth phase and pre-IPO, meaning that it's really scaling nationally or globally, in many ways, shape, or form. And that mirrors and reflects exactly what happens in a traditional venture capital market. And every company that you know and love today, for the most part, whether it be Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. I don't know if you like Facebook anymore, but you might like WhatsApp or Instagram. Those were all invested in by venture capitalists to kick them off. So that's really, really cool, is that you're seeing the marrying of the breakthrough in these new technologies, the breakthrough in new materials and approaches to decarbonization, with that old, sort of methodology of funding.
As you're actually looking at these different opportunities that are coming to you, how can you actually tell? So greenwashing is a big term right now, and a lot of people are getting concerned about greenwashing and whether or not companies are actually taking true action that are making a real impact, or if they're just trying to cover it up and doing it for marketing purposes. So how can you as an investor tell whether or not greenwashing is actually happening? And what's your approach to, is there a filtering system that you have to make sure that companies that you support or invest in rather are actually making a real impact?
Sure. So one of the first things we do is when we look at a company, we put together a memo, whether we're investing or not. And the framework for our investing approach obviously comes with all sorts of criteria on what's going to make a good company. And I think you asked this question earlier and I didn't really truly answer it, but it's everything from that founding team, the quality of the product and service, sort of the size of the market, and critically is the impact thesis. Like we need to truly be able to understand that impact thesis within the UN SDGs to a point where it's credible, and that North Star KPI, their key performance indicator, the thing that they deliver, either has some meaningful sustainability, climate, social, sort of health, inclusive capitalism, the areas we focus on, it has a significant impact. However, it's non-concessionary, meaning that their North Star widget, whatever it is, their North Star KPI, doesn't come at the detriment of commercialization or the detriment of their product reaching product market fit. Meaning they can't sell, $1 for 90 cents, right? Like it's just not, that's not going to work in the way that we promise to our limited partners and the investors in our fund. And so oftentimes there are certification processes for everything that our companies do, whether that be water mitigation, carbon sequestration, access to healthcare, CO2 abated, all of those areas that we focus on have extremely validated and well-honed certification processes at scale. But a lot of the companies that we work with can't afford to do that, right? Like, because they're very young. And so what we do when we write our memo is we talk about the impact thesis, we talk about the North Star KPI and metric for impact, and then we help them to tune that over time as they're building their company. And we always indicate if they decide to pivot and do something completely different, like a photo sharing app or a productivity tool, we will try to divest or sell our shares in many cases, right? Or we will steer them back to a way of building their company that is in line with the sort of original vision of what they thought. And so what that means is by the time they've reached scale and they are actually going through a proper certification process, then they will have very clear, sort of impact that is not greenwashing, and it will be fully validated by a third party.
That's one of your filters, right? Is basically understanding um, whether whether or not the impact is real, or would you consider that a filter?
Yeah, I mean, look, the honest truth is that individual's personal story is very much tied to delivering this product or service. We often think about founder market fit. I just like Nico, the co-founder of WaterPlan, is like the foremost water, you know, prediction and mitigation expert, and has been in love with sort of water science since as long as he's been able to, stand on two legs. So like you can tell really quickly. And this is the same application you would take. This is the same approach you would take with any founder. It's like, why do you care so much to solve this problem? Is what about your personal story, and what about your work history, and what about what you've dedicated your life to, your life's work, is so important that you're going to start a company, arguably one of the hardest things you can do, and most difficult and challenging things you can do with your time, and extremely high rates of failure. Why do you feel so compelled to want to do that for this specific type of, effort, whatever it is, to decarbonization, water mitigation, electrification, all those kinds of things? And it's very clear whether it's super easy to tell. And it's not just like, maybe it's not the first meeting, but then you start to ask more detailed questions, and you start to do some diligence. You start to ask for references. You start to talk to customers. You start to get a very holistic three-dimensional picture as to like how truly dedicated this team is to this mission and vision. And we just won't make an investment if that's not there. It's not even remotely close.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I guess what I'm hearing is that it's almost like the founder's internal compass has to align with what you're seeing externally, and that it's almost like it has to be part of the DNA of the company. And you can fake it for a while, but eventually, if you keep going and going and going, then the real, I suppose, the real side of it comes out, and you'll find out soon enough whether or not they're actually being true and honest about the impact that they're looking to make, or if it's just trying to make a quick buck and go.
And I think that you nailed it. Like this recent change in the market, right, with increasing interest rates and a little bit of sort of a quasi recession that's occurred, and obviously war and an energy crisis, and all of these sort of macro issues that have occurred, has created a significant amount of health in the startup ecosystem. Meaning, when money was free and frothy and floating around, starting a company was almost like another check mark on the resume of people looking for sort of that next like life milestone. And it was difficult in the speedy go times of 2018 to 2022 to tell, 2021 really, when it all ended, to tell, because your timelines were very shortened. So you would meet a founder and you would have to make a decision within a couple, days and sometimes hours about whether you were going to invest in them or not. And, somebody's resume could be great, their background could be great, and their thesis of their company could be great, but you really wouldn't have been able to test truly about whether or not they were truly dedicated to the work. We got lucky because we often passed on a lot of those super hot deals that ended up going nowhere, and stayed very disciplined. But now that's sort of the reality has come back to the market and everything is repriced and the public markets went down, in technology stocks by like 70-80% in some of the best names, which then has filtered down to the early stages. All of a sudden people who are in these cushy jobs are like, damn, that looks hard again. Like, it's not like you can just kind of slap a deck together again and start a company. And that's good, because that's actually true, right? Like, that's actually the reality of it. It is very, very hard. And all the founders, all the sort of investors at Giant have started companies before, and so we feel very strongly that we can empathize with founders in that way. And so, you know, the time and care that we can take to get a founder to know a founder up front and understand truly why it is that they're dedicating their life's work to, something related to solving issues within climate, that just gets us more and more excited to eventually write that check and come in and partner with them and open up our Rolodex, help them with press, help them to get their next round of funding, all the sort of services that we really love and enjoy.
Was there a specific moment when you realized this was the work that you wanted to do and, become a VC and actually help companies get up and running in this way?
Actually, quite the opposite. It was funny. I grew up growing up in Palo Alto. The first VC I met was a dad's friend who would show up to Little League games in his Ferrari in the like parking lot and not watch his son play and scream on his like this giant brick cell phone. I was like, that looks awful. I don't want to be that guy. But I think what actually encouraged me that there was a different path was Y Combinator. And so I got introduced to Y Combinator because one of my good friends from high school was a guy named Trip Adler, and he started a company that was in the second batch of YC called Scribd. And he introduced me to all the YC people in the early days, and got to meet a bunch of people my age that were building companies, and they were all backed by YC. And when people would talk about Paul Graham, Paul had built a company via web and sold it to Yahoo, and then basically wanted to like coach founders on how to beat VCs in the fundraising game and basically level the playing field. And if you look at the results, it's actually they've changed the total game in venture. And so I was like, oh wow, there's a different approach. Now, along the way, I also met a lot different investors than the guy in the parking lot in the Ferrari. There's like a lot of very wonderful people. And then when I built my own company, I had the opportunity to work with people like Eric Wiesen from Bullpen Capital and Dan Kimmerling from Decians. And then I met Cameron McLean, who started Giant Ventures, and he wrote me an angel check to participate in my last company. And startup investors are like a bell curve, right? There's like the really helpful ones that are like 5%. And then there's the big middle who do nothing. And then there's a small percentage that can materially mess up your company. And Cameron was very much on that side. And
on the 5% side that helped.
Yeah. And he actually asked me to be like a part-time, venture partner while I was building my company. And when he was building Giant, and him and Tommy Stadlin, who's co-founded Giant, I really believed in their thesis of backing purpose-driven founders in these areas. And so it was like really fun to do that and help them along the way to find and meet new entrepreneurs and coach them. And so eventually, once my company exited and there was an opportunity to continue to do more work at Giant, I jumped at the opportunity, and it's exceeded my expectations. It's more fun than I ever thought it was going to be. It's more work than I ever thought it was going to be, and those challenges still remain the same, of like what we need to do to help founders and how we need to get out of the way to where a lot of investors mess up who maybe haven't started companies before, and very much with climate tech founders, because these are big incumbent industries, highly regulated industries. The narrative is highly technical. So how do we create that in a digestible way so employees and investors and news media can actually understand what the hell your product and service is. These are things that we didn't know when we were founders, but have learned along the way in investing in, dozens and dozens of companies at Giant, and then hundreds and hundreds of companies in our previous careers and angel portfolios. Yeah. So essentially it's been a journey of, disdain at first, and then finding a new and novel approach, and then eventually stumbling upon the industry myself.
Yeah, it's a great story and a great way to get into it, and actually be part of it in a way that aligns with your values and what you've been looking for. What would you say is next for Giant Ventures?
Giant wants to deploy over $1 billion in the next decade into purpose-driven founders. These are really large societal problems, and we believe that the largest market cap companies of the next decade or two are going to be giants, and they're going to require the capital to get started to solve climate, materials, water, all of these major challenges. And that new economy is really, really exciting to be a part of. So, we're continuing to raise our funds. We're continuing to find great companies. If you're a founder who's working in any of the areas that I mentioned, Jon, Jon at giant.vc. I look at cold emails. I look at warm emails. I look at carrier pigeon notes, whatever, any way you want to get into contact with me, tweets, DMs, LinkedIn, Snapchat, whatever you want. We're open and ready to do business. And I also offer to any founder, even if I don't invest, my door is always open. If you're dealing with a challenge as a climate tech founder, whether that be trying to sort of get your first capital in the door, whether it be get your first customer, anything I can do to help. So many people paid it forward to me, and that sort of ethos of Silicon Valley, a lot of what made it work and makes it work, and even though it's kind of now in the cloud, is that sort of people do help each other out. And I think especially in this industry and sustainability and climate, we need to be as supportive as possible. So I'm more than happy to have the door open.
That's very generous. And you mentioned your email, Jon at giant.vc. And for anyone who's more interested in getting just a general idea of what Giant Ventures does and wants to get a feel for your investment thesis and see if it's a good fit for them, if they're a founder, or just out of curiosity, where's the best place to go to check all of that information out?
Website is giant.vc. Two things I want people to check out is Impact 2020 at the top, and that's our vision for what impact will look like today and on a go-forward basis. And then also our manifesto. Manifesto tells you all about, the areas that we care about. And then finally, take a look at some of the faces. We have built a really incredible advisory board. People like John Brown, who was the first CEO of a petroleum company to admit that humans cause climate change. And now started one of the largest climate investing funds beyond net zero with General Atlantic, and he sits on our advisory board. David Miliband, who is the former UK Foreign Secretary and just a real sustainability advocate. So these types of folks are in our court, and we're ready, willing, and able to help founders however we can.
That's amazing. Well, Jon, thank you so much for your time and for going through this with me. I think I haven't specifically mentioned it, but the work that you're doing is crucial for solving these environmental challenges that we're seeing around the world, whether it's climate related or waste or deforestation. There's just so many different challenges that we have that are human created, and I think it takes money to solve those problems by finding innovative solutions and funding those innovative solutions. So thank you for the work that you're doing to enable that and to push it along and push it forward.
Daniel, thanks for the kind words. I had fun today. This was good. From one podcaster to another, I would highly recommend this to a friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for the time.